The space ecosystem is evolving in real time. As opportunities rise, challenges rise to meet them. Investors, innovators, and integrators must all grapple with tomorrow's hard problems today. How they respond will determine what's next up in space.
In this episode of Nexus, spaceports, coming soon to neighborhoods near you? This is not a science fiction podcast. Yes, America has spaceports, and they aren't just active today. Some say they're reaching capacity. With national and international demand for access to space at all-time highs, potential new players are wondering if they aren't part of the solution. But is the nation on a path towards spaceportopia? Or will market forces keep some infrastructure ambitions more grounded? So, you want to build a spaceport? Let's talk. Here in the Nexus, presented by Aerospace.
And you're here on the Nexus, courtesy of the T-Minus Space Daily podcast. My name is Parker Wishik at the Aerospace Corporation. Thrilled to be talking about a very timely topic with you today on spaceports development in the United States. And we have some real A-listers here. Joining us from the Oklahoma Department of Aerospace and Aeronautics is Craig J. Smith, the Director of Space Industry Development. We also have Scott McLaughlin, the Executive Director of the New Mexico Spaceport Authority, and Karen Jones from the Aerospace Corporation, a Senior Policy Analyst in the Center for Space Policy and Strategy, and the author of a recent policy paper, Spaceportopia. Spaceports are a real thing in America today. A lot of America may have missed that memo, and they probably think, if you were to mention spaceports, they'll think Kennedy Space Center, maybe. But we're seeing them pop up in other places that you might not have expected. So I'd love to give Scott and Craig the opportunity to introduce your spaceports to America. Scott.
Yeah, sure. So Spaceport America is a spaceport in southern New Mexico. It was created by an agency of the state of New Mexico, the New Mexico Spaceport Authority, in about 2005, 2006, and it was our first partnership was with Virgin Galactic, who had bought the technology or licensed the technology from Scale Composites for the Ansari X Prize to go to space twice in 2 weeks. So that was kind of how we got our start, although Spaceport America goes back about to the late 90s, mid-90s, when New Mexico was doing studies on whether to have a spaceport. But anyway, we're about 18,000 acres. We do vertical launch, horizontal launch, and we're currently working on getting our re-entry license. We're in a remote area, so we can do a lot of interesting things. And like all the other spaceports, we're looking to grow as much as we can, do economic development for the area.
Craig, Oklahoma, rich aviation history. Folks might know, might not think of space associating it with Oklahoma.
Absolutely. So you think of leaders like Wiley Coast and the Branagh brothers, and Clyde Cessna. Those are aerospace pioneers in Oklahoma. But the Oklahoma Air Spaceport is a state agency. We were stood up in 1999. We got our spaceport license in 2006. I think we were probably the first in a landlocked state, inland state that got a license from the FAA. It's a 2,700-acre facility. It used to be a naval air station in World War II. Later became an Air Force SAC base in the 50s and 60s. And so we boast a 13,500-foot runway. It's 300 feet wide. And then, of course, we have an adjacent industrial park next to it. So the advantages of that. It's located almost equidistant between Oklahoma City and Amarillo in southwest Oklahoma.
So these are both what we would call inland spaceports, which is exactly what it sounds like. A spaceport based more inland than we are typically used to seeing launches taking place near the coastline for a number of reasons. And there's talk about this being a needed trend by some, one of them being you, Scott, investing in America's inland spaceport infrastructure to ease the glut of space launch demand at our coastal spaceports. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? This an op-ed you just wrote a couple weeks ago, so very timely to get to talk to you about it.
Yeah, I mean, we're in a really unique situation in the space industry where one of the ways I talk to groups is I ask people, how often do you think launches occur at the Cape? And most people guess around 8 or 12 times a year. A few people might say 20 or 30, but it's really once every 3 days, and it's going up from there. Um, so we have this and what's happening with a lot of those launches is they're getting sonic booms when the SpaceX booster comes back down, and there's launches at weird times of the night. So they're getting to experience what it's like to be next to a very active spaceport. The neighbors are. So there has been a lot of looking around about how can we find more launch sites, and DoD's considered overseas sites. They've considered trying to open up more coastal regions, which is in this executive order that came out yesterday. But the point of my op-ed is, why aren't we looking inland? Why aren't we looking at the spaceports like Craig runs and Spaceport America, where we can actually do some inland launch? We can help support that cadence. We can also provide some resiliency for DoD and national security missions. But we have some hills to climb, which one is going to be the technology to make sure that it's safe enough that we can launch over people. Another one is going to be creating the marketplace. And part of my op-ed was focusing on DoD. That is probably DoD that's going to have to help on both of those. They're going to have to help with launch vehicles, both vertical and horizontal, that can fly over people and go to space, and to create that initial market. Prove that if they can do a cadence, we can have a market that the other spaceports would also enjoy.
Craig, Oklahoma likes hearing the thunder make noise. Are your folks wanting more noise from rocket launches in your state?
Absolutely. There's a great interest from our legislature to the community and the public at large. They want to see something. They certainly want to help our DoD partners. In that regard, as Scott explained, that there is a lot to and anything that Oklahoma can do and inland spaceports can do to remedy that and provide for resiliency, some redundancy, and access to space. Absolutely.
And in your op-ed, Scott, you use the term we actually like to use, the flight-proven paradox. I think you take a different meaning to it. But one point to note about spaceports is, they want to analyze and understand the risk associated with certain rocket launches or launch bodies, and that is launch technologies. And there are some barriers to making those assessments if a launch technology is not yet proven. So I did want to note that. And then a quick question for Karen, over to you. Your paper, Spaceportopia, it kind of has dual meaning. I read it going in thinking, all right, we're about to put spaceports anywhere we've got some flat land, but it's actually more of a caveat, if you will. Is some of this congestion we're talking about actually a good thing?
I think when you have congestion, it means you're fully utilizing your assets. Often there's efficiency problems channeling more traffic to certain areas than others, but it's not necessarily a huge warning bell. Certainly, underutilization has its own set of problems as well. It's a balancing act ultimately here. And so the paper Spaceportopia, a primer to successful launch site planning, covers realistic planning that can be done. I wrote this with my colleague, Lindsay DeMarschi, as well as Dr. Priyanka Dopade, University of Auckland. So we brought in a lot of different expertise and experts across the world. Yes, it has a slight U.S. Focus, but we're seeing similar mistakes and similar lessons learned across the world for spaceport.
If you could briefly summarize the frameworks that you line up in Spaceportopia, it really sounds like the good principles for spaceport planning are just good business planning principles.
They really are. That's exactly right. We basically articulate 5 different suggestions for successful spaceport planning. The first is consider regional compatibility and the opportunity costs. Certain places have better opportunities, not as spaceports, and some have immense opportunities as spaceports. And a good quote was, if space is not featured in an economic or strategic plan, you have a problem because you can't go it alone. You need to be working with the community. The second point was apply rigorous economic analysis for regional economic assessment. There is something called the multiplier effect or amplification if you resonate with existing industries and existing infrastructure that is there and now, like data centers, tech parks, etc. And the third one is to improve and expand on spaceport ecosystems. That's the same theme, but going forward, developing strong relationships with the business community and complementary relationships. The fourth one, it should really be the first one, but when you're siting a spaceport, it's so important to be completely transparent and build trust with the local community. We warn about pork barrels, white elephants, and bridges to nowhere. There's sometimes a distortion of public interest. So it's very, very important to be open, work with the community, answer the questions. And then the final point is to avoid irrational exuberance, establish realistic forecasts and expectations. Don't set yourself up for failure.
So that point about knowing your market, knowing your stakeholders, knowing the community, Scott and Craig, I have to imagine that, now a little ways into your spaceport's lifespan, y'all have been doing this with regularity and probably did it a fair bit before you even really broke ground. Y'all want to talk about that, Craig, first?
So yeah, we got our spaceport license in 2006, and there was a great excitement at the beginning when there was all this optimism, and then nothing happened for about a decade and a half, and so there's a lot of expectations from our policymakers, those that fund us, going, what's going on? What is the future? We only had a few lean years that there were some actual questions about should we continue down this pathway? Should we go ahead and close this agency down? And so in the last few years, that's spurred back up. But I think getting expectations in front of those that work with us on these things to understand what spaceport's capable of, what the timing is on that. Space takes time. It's a difficult thing to do. And then looking for some ancillary business, the other things that you can do to make money in the meantime, leasing of this land or hangar space or things of that nature that bring some money in and resources in.
Investing in expanding that ecosystem. Scott, you actually came out with an economic impact analysis yesterday. So again, a very timely discussion we're having. Do you want to talk about the relationship with the community, with the state of New Mexico and the public-private partnership model there a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's exactly what Karen and Craig just said, having the engaged community. You can't build a spaceport if people are against it. And we've seen that in some other places, Camden and Michigan, who are trying to do some things. We're lucky because we're kind of in the middle of nowhere and we're underneath White Sands Missile Range airspace. So we did have some people that were not happy with the spaceport, but a lot of people were looking forward to those jobs. But it's been a long haul, just like it has been for Craig. We were able to sign up with Virgin Galactic, almost 20 years ago, but we're still not quite to regular flights. But the economic impact report, which goes back 6 years, which is approximately when Virgin Galactic had moving a bunch of their staff to New Mexico, you add that plus a bunch of the other activities that we've supported. And, we're bringing in about $81 million of new money. It's higher now, but that's the average over the last 6 years, and plus about 800 jobs, which are indirect, direct, and induced, which is the way economists like to look at it. So I think we've had some good success, but it's been a long time. And I think the point that Karen made about, opportunity cost is, you can't ignore the fact that, if New Mexico would just put that money away in a bank, or if they'd put it on some other project, where would we be? But the one thing I would add to what Karen was talking about is when I have to go talk to legislators and talk about where we are progress-wise, different legislators want different success. Their measure of success is different. Some want me to be in revenue neutral, which is what Alaska is known for doing as best they can, although they get a lot of federal funds. They don't get money from the state. I think Craig gets money from the state. For Oklahoma, we get some money from the state. And you could say, well, that's a bad thing, but we're producing jobs. So the legislators have to decide, our stakeholders have to decide, Are we a public good? Meaning, are we like a road that doesn't necessarily have an immediate return on investment, but is an enabling force? Or should we just be revenue neutral, which would be a whole different way to run the spaceport, especially if it were a completely private spaceport. So the economic impact report is interesting, and we're glad to get it out there. Our stakeholders get to look at it, and it's just an example of what a spaceport can do.
So you'll mention this executive order dated August 13th. Obviously, with less than 24 hours to digest this, we're not going to go too in-depth on it, but it does make reference to spaceports directing Secretary of Defense, Transportation, and NASA to expedite spaceport development as part of promoting commercial space innovation. More to come on that. There's a 180-some day period for the government to act here. Karen, consistency across government, good sign that they are invested or interested in spaceport infrastructure potentially?
I think it's a good sign that they're interested in spaceport infrastructure, but I also think this needs to be looked through a very wide lens. Today on CNBC, the Secretary of Transportation and acting NASA Administrator, Sean Duffy, asserted that the executive order is to support spaceports around the country, and that makes sense for the private sector. While that's true, sometimes space as an industry competes in a region with other industries. So again, it's about optimizing it for the region. For instance, in certain areas in Florida, there are exclusion zones for aviation, fishing, and maritime activities during a launch. It certainly doesn't mean these industries are not compatible, but there are impacts in both directions. So I think it needs to be looked at through, and I'm not saying they are not looking at it broadly, but going forward after this executive order, that's how I think we should approach this.
Well, I think it's good that they recognize the challenge and the difficulty that lies ahead and the bottleneck that exists. We'll continue to investigate it and look at the parameters of it and what that entails. So the fact that they're discussing it and bringing it up is got some optimism to it.
Craig, this aside, it is something, Scott, you referenced in your op-ed, wanting more federal interest in inland spaceports. The states that, y'all touched on this earlier, the states that you are located in have been very willing and participatory partners in your enterprises. Is that something that the rest of the space enterprise can learn from, these other industry sectors that might expand to become offshoots of a spaceport ecosystem?
Yeah, I think so. You can't exist if we're going to get to some sort of orbital launch cadence of any kind. We're not going to exist on our own. We're going to need partners all throughout what we're now calling Space Valley, from Albuquerque to El Paso. We're going to need a lot of support, and of course, we want to create those adjacent businesses, but we need the support of those adjacent businesses. But going real quick back to the executive order, I think one of the key pieces that's missing out of there is actually a national strategy. So sure, they're reducing potentially some regulation to help things pop up, but it doesn't answer the question, what does a network of national spaceports look like, and how does that support national security space and keep us competitive and help private industry? That's what I think we really need.
Understood. So we're at time here. Great discussion. Not nearly enough time to talk about this topic. I want to offer quick closing points to Craig, and then Scott, and then Karen.
Well, I want to point out, following nearly a decade of not a lot going on at our particular spaceport, and some concerns from our legislature, sometimes that there was some challenges on funding, they were looking to maybe even defund this organization and close it down. But in the last half dozen or so years, there's been quite a bit of an interest in development in this area. And it's really exciting now. I've got a legislature now that is very excited, very engaged in what's going on here and wanting to make some investments out here. And we had a recent agreement with a company called Dawn Aerospace, which will provide some opportunities for us in the future as well. So we're really excited about what the future holds.
Scott.
Yeah, well, we're trying to move forward like the other spaceports, but I think like Karen's paper, very good paper is a cautionary tale about making sure you have all the right elements. And are you creating the right kind of spaceport? Are you creating the right kind of ecosystem? Does it really fit? I think there are some spaceports where it was forced, or when they think about launching, they don't have those adjacent support industries. So anyway, we're trying to do exactly what Karen said, trying to figure out how to fit into our ecosystem and bolster that area. And again, it's to build jobs. But people say space is hard. I would say spaceports are hard too.
Karen.
Okay, well, the space industry is continuing to mature. And with any maturing industry, they often ask themselves, how can we do more with less? How can we be more efficient? And the space industry is doing that now. We're building bigger rockets, and that means greater payload mass per launch and greater cost efficiencies. There's also greater or more capable satellites. The next generation of Starlink will be 1 terabit per second. We're also trying to extend lifetime of satellites through various means. All that's going to be very good for the industry. It's going to lower capital expenditures and increase efficiency. But it might mean also potentially, eventually, a drop in launch because we're being more efficient and we're maturing. And I think that needs to be part of the conversation as we think about our future spaceport capacity.
Well, thank you all. That was a great discussion. If you're in Oklahoma or if you're in New Mexico or a neighborhood near you, look up soon because space is coming your way. Odds are. Thank you very much to Craig Smith in Oklahoma, to Scott McLaughlin in New Mexico, to Karen Jones at Aerospace. I'm Parker Wishik. Thanks to the AT- team, as always, for having us, and we'll see you next time in the Nexus.